they're buying more guns, they're buying more ammo, they're buying more surveillance. All of that is money that is being taken out of communities. Things like surveillance require a perpetual sense of crime. And all of these companies are based off of profits. So it's bad for business if there's no crime or violent crime or victims or anything.
Press the button to begin.
You're listening to the Social Primate with your host, Eddie Aguirre. And today we have the one and only, the powerful Joey Scott. He's an LA-based investigative journalist and documentary photographer. What's up, Joey?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, man, I appreciate you coming out here, making your way out of Lincoln Heights, you said. Like, keeping it local.
Absolutely.
Dude, man, thank you so much. Now, I wanted to have you on here because over the last couple months, I've been able to see some of your work through LA Public Press, being one of those sources. And most importantly, I wanted to have this conversation with you because what we're currently seeing in today's political climate is an increase in surveillance. We're seeing a lot of targeting of people who are, you could consider radical left, right? That's what the language we're seeing nowadays. But I think it's mostly important because, as I mentioned, over the last couple of months, I've been seeing your work has been pulling back the curtain on, again, policing, surveillance, and state power itself. And through that, I've noticed that local and state agencies as well have been kind of stockpiling on ammunition, weapons, stuff that you would kind of already bat an eye when it's happening, but you start seeing the patterns of what we're currently seeing now. So I want to get a little bit into that, but I definitely want to get more information about yourself first and foremost. So tell me how you ended up in this line of work.
Yeah, I kind of got into this in a non-traditional sense. It was 2020. I had lost my job, and then started watching kind of doom scrolling during the early parts of the 2020 protests, the George Floyd protest. And it was shocking to see, the death of George Floyd. And then people took the streets, the precinct burnt down in Minneapolis. And then through my searches on Twitter, I was just getting all of these videos of just unprovoked police violence against people protesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just being inundated by that. And I was just like overcome with just anger and frustration of just this power dynamic. It just seemed like playground bullies getting to have a little fun and take their anger out on these people. And so I was like, well, I got to go out there and document this stuff. I started out as a photographer, love taking photos. So my initial foray into it was just taking photos and sharing videos of the protests online. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I just got sucked into just following the movement as it went on past the initial protests. Around that time, the far right was sort of taking prominence as well. The storming of the Capitol, mm-hmm. All these sort of things were kind of going on at once. And it just felt like a very historical, important moment to catch. And, not being originally from LA, it was a great way to sort of learn what LA was all about, the communities here. And it was the first time I lived in a place that had like mass protests.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I lived near downtown, so I could just drive down there. And then from there, I just got connected with other movements and impacted families of police violence. And yeah, that's sort of just where it went.
Now, you say you started as a photographer. Now, when you started getting into journalism and writing itself, what was that like for you? Like, what made that transition into it?
Yeah, for me, I love taking photos, but I always just felt it was just half of the story. And I had always had an interest in writing. I really enjoyed writing stuff. And I thankfully had the help of Cerise Castle, formerly, when Knock was when I was a part of that. And she sort of brought me in mm-hmm. and just kind of gave me, a bit of help in how to be a journalist, so to speak. And there's a learning curve, and I'm still learning, and I'm still very new to this field, but I enjoy writing, and I enjoy researching, and I enjoy sort of, providing sort of a service in that regard of like, here's what's going on, here's why it's important, mm-hmm. here's somebody's voice I want to elevate, or I don't know. It's for me, it's a nice outlet for all of my anger about the whole state of things at this moment. And I think that's really what brought me out into the streets and then into journalism was just like, I'm angry, I want to do something about it. I go down these rabbit holes of researching and learning about stuff, and I may as well put that energy towards something. And it was journalism.
Yeah. No, that's interesting because, I mean, one is capturing what's going on, but the other one is you actually taking that time to delve into the whys, right? And I think when you get into that aspect of things, you're really just, like you said, you're going down this rabbit hole. And I would only imagine that this anger that you're feeling only starts it starts solidifying even more because you start seeing everything that's at play, right? So with that, now that you're at this point, you're about a year and a half in writing or
Yeah, I would say about 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, of like consistent journalism.
Yeah. So how has that shaped your perspective of that?
In terms of
Like just the local and federal agencies, just the way they've been moving around.
yeah, the more I've sort of looked into things, it's been eye opening. Just the sort of stuff that happens passively in the background.
Yeah.
When I think of the LAPD, for example, their Board of Police Commission meetings are on a Tuesday at like 10 in the morning.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So like, no one is really there or like paying attention, but like each week they're approving $10,000 worth of equipment or changing policy, and no one's catching it in regards to like the general public. And so for me, those are the sorts of things where I'm like, oh, people should know about this and catch these things, when I catch them, because it's done intentionally. They have these at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday because it's a lot harder to participate.
Right. Yeah. Most of the people are at work.
Yeah. And so that's intentional. So a lot of my work is reading agenda for police departments across the state and country and city council meetings. But yeah, once you sort of see the bureaucracy in the background and the very little pushback of the people who are supposed to represent the police commission, supposed to represent us, the citizens, and they just kind of blindly accept everything. And so I think people should be aware of that in their communities.
Yeah, no, I wanted to bring up, I had mentioned to you right before we got on air that reading your articles and seeing what we're currently facing, there was this pattern that I noticed that was happening since this article that you wrote was back in August 2024, and it's called CHP is using and buying military equipment against state law. And then a couple months later, there was another article that is dated November that says LA City Council affirms the LAPD may continue using its military equipment. And as we fast forward into this past summer, we start seeing all these things at play actually coming into effect. So, like, what does that tell you in regards to that?
Yeah, the stories are based around a bill that was passed by the state following the 2020 protests. It was sort of one of those accountability, transparency bills that got passed through. And part of that was to add transparency to the military equipment police departments were using. And it revealed that a lot of these police departments have a cache of military weapons and equipment that I don't think people were aware of. And so with the CHP case, I was just happen chance trying to see their military equipment and what they had, and noticed they didn't have it. And then I went back to the state law and saw that they were supposed to have it. And then I reached out to them and they're like, it doesn't apply to us. And then I basically caught them in a lie in that. And now they have it up finally after 2.5 years. But it was revealing in the sense that, like, we've always known that they have had military equipment of some sort. We see them at protests. We see the little, like, armored vehicles drive by, the helicopters in the sky. It's just a part of that whole ecosystem. But yeah, they've just been stockpiling it, and this goes back to 9/11 and the war on terror, the war on drugs before that. This is just a continuation of all of that. And then especially for LAPD, this goes back to following Watts when they created the first SWAT team, which is all military based. And so, in LA history, it's just sort of that continuation of like foot soldiers locally, armed for war, essentially. And LAPD just released their most recent one, and they want to acquire, I believe, 10 submachine guns for some reason.
Ooh, yeah.
And, looking forward, we have the Olympics coming up. So a lot of this stuff is stores stockpiling before the Olympics, and, this sort of overreach continues, especially with surveillance. So yeah, I think it adds transparency so people know what police departments have. But again, city council, police commissioners just check it off and go, I have it.
Dude, so do they have to justify why they're getting those specific like weaponry or equipment like that?
Yes, but it's very vague. Like there's no like specificity in terms of like why they need submachine guns. The idea maybe is like, well, what if there's a terrorist attack?
Right.
It's always these sort of imaginative, 0.00% chance of something happening, but they got to be ready for it. But yeah, I think part of the issue with the bill was it just required very little and it was very vague, and there's really no, transparency requirements. Like departments can be more specific if they want with it. Like they could be more transparent and break down like why they're getting this and that, but because they don't have to, they don't.
Yeah. Now, I am aware that I think at some point you filed for a public records request from the LAPD in regards to, I believe it was ammunition purchases and restocks. But from my understanding, and this is just me, condensing everything, but it doesn't look like that led anywhere specifically. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, it was after the protests in June, and while I was there documenting it, I saw that they had on the skirmish lines, just boxes of less lethal ammunition that they were just pulling out of and just shooting at people. I was like, that's boxes of stuff. And I'm sure there's an inventory of some sort. So I was trying to see if they were restocking that and seeing how much more they were buying in the sense of like maybe anticipating more protests sort of view. I didn't get anything out of it because they didn't buy anything, but one of the things I found out was through the military equipment bill for this upcoming year, they're buying 200 more rounds of each type of, less lethal. So they're buying more. But the other part was another bill that required them to report their use of projectiles at protests. And so far, the 3 agencies downtown have released some of them. And in total, they have fired over 10,000 rounds of various less lethal ammunitions, and that includes, rubber bullets, that includes flashbang grenades, tear gas, pepper balls. And so that's in over a 2-week span, essentially. And it's just unprecedented.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I first heard the concept of less lethal, I was a little confused about what that meant. Because, I mean, less lethal it's only so far away from it being lethal itself, right? And at a close range, I've seen reports where there was a specific person who basically got shot in the genitals, and that was over for him in that sense. But that was just one case of many cases. So when we take a look at that, at what that actually means, and the force that we actually saw them carry out during these protests, like it really starts showing that the more weapons you get, the more you can abuse of the people, who you're supposed to be protecting.
Yeah, the name of less lethal is obviously very deceiving. They could be very, very lethal, especially, they hit you in the face and the eye. The gentleman lost part of his male anatomy in that. That's sort of the industry name. I think style guide wise for journalism, some people use less than lethal, which is even more inaccurate. It's a nice like umbrella, so to speak, of saying less lethal, but to say that those are not dangerous and can kill people or severely injure people, like, yeah, it's less than lethal, but someone in Paramount, the sheriff's department, blew off someone's finger, with a tear gas canister, or, those sorts of things that can have severe permanent damage, like brain injuries and such. So, like, yeah, it's not lethal, but it's pretty debilitating.
Yeah. And now, what has been your experience on the ground when you're seeing this happen? Like, how have you kept yourself protected in all of this?
Yeah, part of it is experience, so it's very much like situational awareness. Like, you learn that police act in a very stilted, very predictable way because that's how they're trained.
Yeah.
And so you can sort of read the skirmish lines of like when things are maybe gonna get a little like dicey on their end. And it's just part of it's luck. Part of it is just bob and weave sort of thing. You got to kind of like dance around and try not to get hit. But it is very hard sometimes to avoid some of that. I've fortunately have only been batoned in the chest and knocked to the ground. Some of my colleagues have fared far worse. Yeah. But it's one of those things that like you do what you can to be safe. You wear a helmet. You wear a plate carrier, which is just mind-blowing to me that you have to do at a protest in America, is wear a plate carrier that protects your vital organs. And more recently now, tear gas respirators, goggles. It's a lot to carry around, and it's unfortunate that that's what we have to do. But that is one of the ways you can protect yourself in that regard. And the other part's just situational awareness and knowing where to not be and where to be. And yeah.
And all this is while you're wearing like press credentials and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, my vest has press on it. I have press pass. I have press written on my helmet to try to make it very obvious of who I am.
Right. Yeah.
And we saw that like that doesn't matter recently. The LAPD federal judge found that they violated state law and the Constitution and how they arrested and assaulted and used less lethals against journalists. So, and these are all very obvious, journalists that this was happening to. And so, it helps in that regard, but also it doesn't matter to a degree. So, yeah, you do that to sort of protect yourself.
Weren't you searched too? Like they searched you, right? Or something?
Yeah, me and Lex from LA Taco had our bags searched because where we were at, they had used tear gas on a leftover group outside of City Hall, and we didn't want to walk through it. And they were firing off these stinger grenades just overhead, and it just popped, just audible, loud. And so we wanted to go through the skirmish line and just leave the protest.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't let us without searching our bags because he was like, well, you might have a bomb in there. You might have a weapon, and I got to protect my guys. And it was just a very surreal experience because in my 5 years of covering protests, like that has never, ever happened.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because Lex and I don't look like traditional journalists. We are just very like dressed normal clothes, and we look pretty normal. And and I think that's part of it too, is you get kind of profiled in that regard.
Damn, that's crazy. I mean, because I personally haven't had the come face to face with being inside of the protest that deep, right? I've been on the outskirts. I've been there before it starts escalating, right? But just seeing those videos and just seeing what happens to people, like, it's baffling to know that when this all starts, it quickly escalates the moment law enforcement agencies get involved, like almost immediately, right? And that's when we start seeing either agitators come out, or we start seeing just kind of things escalate over some of the smallest things. And before you know it, I mean, people are reacting on their natural emotions, to stand up and stand up for what's right. So it really, it's saddening to see that while all this is happening, they're getting ready to see us as an enemy, right? With all this stockpiling and stuff. So has that confirmed anything that you've seen over the last couple of months in terms of how they're trying to, what am I trying to say here? Just manipulate language for their own means.
Yeah, I one of the things I really noticed this time around in June was this, the behavior changed on how they police protests. They had gotten way more violent, way more confrontational than, in the 5 years I've covered protests, they've ever been. And one of the things that came out of the 2020 protests was LAPD added more training. Like, part of their behavior and screw-ups at the protest was because they weren't trained enough. Well, they got more training, which made them really good at hurting people, So, and that's what they did. They it reacted in a way that I've never seen them act, and as quickly as they've acted to, like, squash a protest. And so as they're piling more weapons, they're doing more training. A lot of the training they do is very, like, militaristic.
Yeah.
Then you take this sort of, like, warrior cop mindset a lot of these guys have, and you see that some of them enjoy it on the line. It's, like I said, it is probably some of the most violent response to protests I've ever seen, and I've seen it a lot. And it's rare that tear gas gets used in downtown LA because LAPD rarely ever uses tear gas, and they used it at this protest. The horses,
I know, for real.
like the horses have come out before, but never have they, like, really been used consistently like that. And that there's a lot of racist sort of, like, history with using horses, and, like, just the sheer danger, and we saw that. And there seemed to act like a sense of, we know we're probably not going to get in trouble. Whatever lawsuits come out of this, we don't have to pay. Taxpayers pay. We can just go back and ask for more money for more training. And I also think part of it, too, is this is practice for the World Cup that's coming up, for the Olympics. Part of this is, like, getting all these systems in place for these mass events.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of it. And I think the other part, too, was the mayor really wanted to ensure that she could prove to Trump that she could end these protests. So he didn't have to call in more National Guard or anything, and, like, have this sort of narrative of, like, lawlessness in LA, which didn't obviously stop that because, people were convinced all of LA was on fire. And yeah. So, there's a lot of, like, layers going on there in that regard.
Damn. Now, beyond the physical force, we also have seen an increase in surveillance, especially targeting either press members or organizers or activists. They're coming to your house after the fact and just, blasting your door down with, the SWAT team, whatever it is. My thing is, something that's hard to explain the scope of how big this is to people, because they already feel like they're being watched, right? Like, oh, well, they're already watching what I'm doing. What does it matter what else they know? But what that really is, at least to me, is you're giving them the green light, the okay, to just start normalizing aspects of it. Kind of like how we're seeing right now, how it just seems like the government's becoming like this fascist state of things. And you're seeing how slowly it starts accumulating to the point where people are going to be okay with what's going on. So you having some experience in doing some research and just kind of doing some of that investigating, what can you tell us, or what can you tell the audience who are in that position?
Yeah, yes, it is true. There is sort of this, you cannot escape this sort of surveillance state that we live in some degree, sort of passive surveillance, or police and, surveillance, or you're on your phone and ads are being sent to you. Those are, data, which is part of the whole surveillance apparatus. And yes, there is a degree that we have to give up some privacy. And that comes from also 9/11, which is like, so long as I'm safe, I'm willing to give up some privacy, so that we can catch criminals or stop terrorists. Yeah. And I think really the issue with that is you can see how quickly, the government can consider somebody a criminal, like what we consider criminality. Yeah. Somebody going and seeking abortion care, that is now a criminal, that they can have all your information and find out where you went. How quickly undocumented folks who had never been have a crime record or anything become criminals because they crossed, like
Right.
are now Antifa. Whoever they want to say Antifa is now is part of that. So it's I think part of that narrative of like we're already being watched is like, I'm already being watched and I'm doing nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of doesn't matter because you can quickly start being a target of that. And yeah, the thing with surveillance too is like privacy is an issue. We see with license plate readers, they're just collecting billions and billions of license plate data, and they can find out where you live, your patterns, all of that. And it's just very intrusive. But I think another part of the surveillance conversation is and basically sort of the whole conversation is they're buying more guns, they're buying more ammo, they're buying more surveillance. All of that is money that is being taken out of communities, things like surveillance require a perpetual sense of crime. And all of these companies are based off of profits. So it's bad for business if there's no crime or violent crime or victims or anything. And so I think a bigger conversation is sort of this very profit capitalist surveillance state that we have, where that conversation is, it's taking money out of the community that could actually help people be safe, and that goes with the weapons and policing in general. It's just like, this is money, and we know this to be true if we took care of people's basic needs and all of that, crime would go down. And but what we're seeing now with city budgets is they're getting cut, programs are getting cut, and now the policing stuff is going up, and sort of it kind of insinuates that they're anticipating what we know is when poverty and all of these things increase, so does crime. And so it's sort of this like, it's good for business for the police to have these taken out of their communities.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because I see this as a symptom of, or not even a symptom, but it's just paranoia, right? And I think at some point, if you really look at it just on an individual level, it's like at some point, if you become so paranoid, everything around you starts becoming the enemy, like I mentioned earlier, right? So at what point do you draw the line and say, okay, I'm overreacting here? And to me, that's what I'm seeing. And again, I'm not this knowledgeable person on what exactly is going on. But if you're asking me to take a look, zoom out and kind of take a look at what's going on, you definitely start seeing that at this point, they don't even know who to trust.
Mm-hmm.
Like to them, the population is the enemy. And if you're not with them, I've heard this once. I have family in law enforcement. And one time I was giving them a ride and they were like, yeah, make sure you don't get pulled over for, what did I say? DWB, driving while brown. And I was like, what? And they were just, the way they were conversing amongst each other, they were already talking about people. They were calling them civies, like citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, you're already dissociating yourself from the masses, right? And that already, you're making it about us versus them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's that whole thin blue line concept of like, it's them versus us, the civilians, and you can back the blue sort of stuff. And, but yeah, they don't see themselves as the community. They see us as, it's like people in the military, they see us as civilians, and them as like officers and all of that. And that obviously is sort of the mindset that go into this. And, I think, with the privacy aspect and the paranoia, just the degree of surveillance, like every month, every day almost, LAPD compiles social media posts of people that people put out. So any flyers that you have, any posts that you may have made referencing a mutual aid thing or something, they track so that they know what you're doing. And so they assume that mutual aid is some sort of like criminal behavior that the police have to be aware of. They don't need to know that, part of it is don't make their jobs any easier. And the whole Antifa thing kind of, when Trump brought it up, I went back and found that LAPD met with General Barr at the time with LAPD in 2020 to see if there were any connections between protesters and Antifa. And all 500 people, so to speak, that were arrested during the protests were basically run through an FBI database to see if they were a part of Antifa. And they found no connections. But like, you see how like quickly, like, what is Antifa or what is a extremist, you know, can very quickly shift depending on who's in power. And if it's you, they have everything they need to know about you and can act on it. And I think that's the problem. And then companies are making money off of that.
Yeah, I mean that's always been my thing too. Like, you know, throughout my years, I've learned the destruction and power of language itself and how they use it. Right. I was like 11 or 10 when 9/11 happened, and you know, I grew up in that era and stuff. And obviously, I didn't understand it until I got a little bit older. But then you start realizing that the language also used, right? Terrorists, you know, whatever labels they were trying to pin on people. It was just a matter of trying to push an agenda. And similar to what you're seeing now, like the criminal aspect, like it's easy to turn people against each other when you say, oh, well, he's a criminal because he technically broke the law by coming here, right? So it's that language that I think it's easy for people to get manipulated with if they're not fully aware of where things are grounded on, you know. And in this case, when you really think about like the surveillance stuff, man, there's times where I'm like just sharing stuff and I'm like second guessing things. And I think that's the point to them too. Like they want you to feel a type of way, like this fear of you sharing stuff, because that stops them, or sorry, that makes their job easier by making sure you're not doing anything you're not supposed to.
Yeah. You basically self-police yourself.
Yes, yeah.
And it's sort of this idea of like, one of the byproducts of like COINTELPRO is like, you know, somebody in here might be like undercover. And so you start acting in a way that you think there's an undercover person there and there isn't. And so, you know, that's them basically controlling and sort of limiting sort of your speech or what you're going to do or say or anything like that. And yeah, you can very quickly have your social media monitored. And when LAPD, you know, if they do a stop and have you fill out a field interview card, that's where they take your name, your address, your phone number, anything gang related that they would want to put on there. But another thing they can ask you is for your social media.
Damn.
So they can ask for your Instagram and all of that. You don't have to say or give it to them. But, you know, in conversations I've had with people who have been stopped or a part of those communities, you know, that experience a lot of police stops, they've given police that information and have noticed that the police show up on their Instagram stories as viewing it, and like they start showing up at places that they post about, and you end up just in the system now. And, you know, it's for no reason other than you got stopped for some reason. It's just profiling and terrible use of resources. Just that's not really crime fighting, you know, whatever that they do, you know, public safety.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the most eye-opening things that I experienced this summer, and I mentioned this before, some people were like, man, he talks about it all the time. No, well, I was in the city of Paramount, and it was one of my first times seeing, who I think it was the sheriff's department, who were basically cooperating with ICE while they were trying to like take people away, and there was people protesting. And obviously, I've already felt betrayed by law enforcement agencies in the past, but this just made it worse. You know, seeing this happen, seeing them how they were cooperating together, and then in front of everybody saying that wasn't the case. It was like what? Like we're actually seeing what's going on with you guys. Like how can you lie to the community and to its members, right? And I had a brief conversation with somebody who was connected with law enforcement, and they had told me that there's a lot of officers who are more than willing to work with ICE, but they're just not able to because of current policies in place here in Los Angeles. And that was like, what? Like, how?
Yeah, I think people kind of forget that, like, who they, you know, were civilians, or so to speak, their allegiances with other law enforcement.
Yeah.
You know, like they would happily be helping out with ICE if they could. And that's also a thing of like language and semantics. It's like we don't cooperate with ICE, or we don't do civil immigration enforcement,
Mhm.
which is like, sure, but also like you show up to protect them
Yeah.
during a raid. That's them keeping public safety, in order. And
Mhm.
that's sort of their way to weasel around making it easier for ICE to take people. And they're more than happy to do so. Like, I think there was sort of these like chants and stuff where it's like people are yelling at the police, like, you should be protecting us from ICE and everything. And I was like, no, their job is to protect, they're not here to protect you,
Right.
and like, they're never going to like turn their backs and go after ICE. Like they're more than happy. Like those are their buddies who just have a federal job. And like LAPD or the sheriffs or any police department isn't going to arrest ICE. They're not going to arrest them for, not having identification or not having plates on their cars or anything. The police aren't going to do that.
Right.
Like those are their friends. They just have a different line of business,
Yeah, I mean, and now that you mentioned that, I mean, at least in the last couple of days, if I'm correct, Gavin Newsom passed the No Secret Police Act, which is, in essence, requires federal and local officers to identify themselves. Within limitations, I think there's like things in there. But personally, what do you think of that?
Um, I I think it's, a nice like gesture, but it's not going to do anything. Like you being able to see a ICE officer's face or their identification is sure that probably helps people feel safe in a moment or know who's coming after them, so to speak. Um, but I think a lot of people think it will add accountability or be able to identify bad officers or something. And ICE agents aren't going to be held accountable for their behavior. Like they could do the most illegal things and they're going to get away with it, especially with this administration. So like you being able to identify them is kind of a moot point at that point. It's like, okay, this person's bad and nothing's going to happen. I think what's a positive about it is it kind of removes sort of that scary masked, they do it for intimidation, hiding their faces and such. It's just this very like masked vigilante sort of like look. And that's scary and that's on purpose. And I think getting rid of that at least makes them feel a little less tough,
Yeah.
I don't know what in terms of like enforcement and such like that will do in regards to anything like what, is, LAPD going to, give a citation to ICE or anything like, it's hard enough to have a LAPD officer have a sustained complaint for anything and you can identify them. And so cool. I think visually it's a nice change to be able to see their face and not be masked up and, hide like cowards behind them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a couple months ago, the city of Huntington Park, they passed some sort of ordinance that they were, if I'll correct myself later if I'm wrong, but the idea was that they were going to withhold city resources when it came down to federal agents being in the city. I mean, that definitely sounds like it has some teeth in it, but when you really take a look at it and we go based on the conversation we were just mentioning right now, I mean, they're local agencies. They're agencies at the end of the day. So, like, how much power do they really have? And if they really did have power, like, are they going to cooperate with that, right? So, I don't know. Like you said, it's a good way to make people feel at ease to an extent, because that is what's rampant right now in our neighborhoods. It's just that fear. But at the end of the day, unless there's something that proves that these agencies are going to actually look after their people, then that's a different story. But so far, we haven't seen anything that points towards that direction.
No, it's again, I think part of it is we're realizing the powerlessness of what cities and counties can do when it comes to ICE, and federal law enforcement. And that is just sort of the division of government and such. But, these ideas of sanctuary cities, are fine in the sense of like, yeah, they don't do civil immigration enforcement, but also if you get arrested and fingerprinted and it finds out that you have an immigration warrant or something, ICE can come get you in a sense. Like if license plate readers, for example, federal agencies they're not supposed to, but have had access to those databases to find people.
And those are supposed to be state.
Yeah, so there's a state law that, prohibits sharing license plate data with immigration enforcement. We are now finding out that doesn't, that law really hasn't been respected in any capacity. But and these sorts of things, like the local police are working with federal police all the time. They're working with the FBI. They're working with Homeland Security on various like non-immigration things. Obviously, that's changing because all the resources now are going to ICE, no matter what your agency is. But so they have to be sort of friendly to these people because they're doing narcotics and these sorts of things. But also all the intelligence is going into these fusion centers, which basically take federal intelligence and they take local intelligence and they share it amongst themselves. And that's how they get threat assessments. And records I found have these sort of threat assessments of like what's happening at protests and who is a big threat of in the region. And, anarchists is one of them, or cartels and, and so all of that is being shared across federal and local. And so like they're not cooperating or civil law enforcement, or immigration enforcement, but they are sharing information and have access to information that federal government can use to find you,
Yeah, I mean, now this is a super hypothetical question, but is there a way that we can survive as a society if we move away from these agencies? Like, is that even a thing, a reality?
Like local, federal?
Yeah, local. Because I mean, local are, again, they're supposed to protect and serve, but we know that their interests land on federal interests and protecting federal property and personnel.
Yeah, I think for me, I am of the mindset of getting to a world of abolishing, these agencies altogether. I think part of that comes down to it's a process, and everyone's thinks it's going to happen overnight or anything. But I think people's views on this are sort of souring on how they view police.
Yeah,
and I think 2020 did that. I think now people are seeing that in terms of federal police and ICE.
Yeah,
ICE shouldn't exist, and like you're seeing a lot of these sort of more centrist people and sort of more of these like old like 9/11 or Iraq war sort of war hawks being like, we should abolish ICE, so to speak. That's almost like a popular opinion these days, and it's slowly turning into that because people see every day the terror that they do and just what they're able to get away with. And I think people are sort of souring to at least that. And there's a possibility there of, okay, maybe we can imagine a world without ICE.
right. As a
Um,
start.
Yeah, we all got to start somewhere, but your local police are ICE, just with different job requirements,
Now, spending your time doing these type of reports and work, like I know you mentioned earlier that the emotion that was running through you was anger, So at this point, what other ways have you found of turning this anger into action with the work you're doing?
Yeah, for me, it's my journalism is my outlet, so to speak, and it's what motivates me to do what I do. Underneath it is like I don't like bullies, and like I see that that's what is happening, and emotionally it's very difficult because the anger can turn into anxiety, and the anxiety can just overwhelm you. And so I've tried to find stories and other things to write that aren't as stressful, and that's sort of my goal sort of in the coming years, to write more stuff, not in this realm,
Mm-hmm.
because it will burn you out.
Yeah.
And emotionally, it really kind of, skews your head a little bit. And part of that is just camaraderie with other journalists and having that space of people who are familiar with what you just saw or what you went through. Like, it's very hard to talk to a general public about some of these things,
Right.
and sort of what happens in your mind. And it's also scary when you aren't fazed by some of this stuff, because it's like, I should probably be scared in this moment, or I should probably like be worried, and I'm not. And that's, kind of good, but kind of bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it just, it's trying to find outlets to where you aren't overcome by it,
No,
because it's really easy to do.
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think all of us felt it. I mean, honestly, if you've been in LA since January with the fires and like everything that happened, by this point, the burnout is real for sure, and again, at the end of the day, like we need to find those outlets to kind of, or not even outlets, just find a moment to step away from it and just kind of decompress, because this is a long fight.
Yeah. I mean, it's a marathon, and like, none of these issues are going to go away anytime soon.
Mhm.
And I think part of my fear is like missing something or not catching something that I want to report on, and feeling like this is something that I've been following and I'm not writing about it or reporting on it. And there's really just sort of this fear behind that of like, it's okay that somebody, have somebody else carry that for a little bit so that you can take care of yourself. And that's where that camaraderie takes place. But I don't think people really have, as a whole in Los Angeles, have really like sat down and really processed like what this year has been. Like, we all went through these like horrific fires that went on for what felt like forever.
Mhm.
And like the trauma of that. And then you have just the general trauma of Trump and this dismantling of the government. And then now you get to these ICE raids, and like, people are impacted by that. Like, everyone I know has been impacted by one of those things
Mhm.
in a very direct way. And I don't think we've really just stopped to like take care of each other and like really process what has happened.
Of course, yeah.
Because I think we've just been in sort of this like fight or flight mode since like January, in that regard, and previous before that. But like, especially here in LA, and just, we've just been, the trauma of all that, like, it's heavy.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I want to mention before we start wrapping it up was like, we saw what happened out here in LA and some of the tactics used, but that just goes to show again that the persistence is also happening from the people who are resisting. And again, it's a marathon, like you mentioned earlier. But one last question is, out of this conversation, what kind of, let's say, hope can you give listeners as a call to action for what they could be doing in their community?
Yeah, I think the best way to just sort of like center it is like, sometimes hope feels very naive. But I think so long as your hope isn't ignorant to like what's going on, and that spurs you to make change in some regard. I think the fires are a good example of just connecting with the community and coming together and getting activated in some way, and like giving, helping the unhoused people in your community, or checking in on your neighbor. Go do a shift at a Home Depot and monitor the parking lots. Like,
Yeah.
there are little things you can do that don't involve going to a protest. And I think LA adapted in that way very quickly. And you had these rapid responses and these patrols, and there's always little things that you can do. And it's not like you have to have this big commitment in terms of time or money or, safety. And especially if you're someone, who's white and, has that degree of privilege,
Yeah.
be that Karen in the parking lot, like filming ICE and yelling at them. Like,
Oh, yeah.
that goes a long way. Because then that means the other people like that feel empowered to do that. And
Yeah.
so just lead as that. And it's okay to be scared, but it's also important that like it, what they're doing is not very popular. And what we're doing with each other, is. And so long as we care about each other, I think it's very easy to move past this sort of fascist state, you know, because all we have is each other, you know, like the government relies on fear and power and being a tyrant and all of that, but they don't have the capacity to care like we do. And so long as you have that and a degree of hope that's informed by the realities, I think that's how you keep that endurance, so to speak, and take breaks and, you know, step away if you need to, but also feel like people are doing things that you may not see, but they're making an impact. And, you know, jail supports and help incarcerated people, send them books. Like, there's these little things that sort of chip away at the walls that we have amongst each other. And if you can start chipping away at that, you can find yourself free in that regard. And, you know, I think we have to start with respecting people's humanity.
Yeah. Hey, powerful words from Joey.
Thank you.
Dude, thank you so much. And you know what? Shout out to everybody holding it down out here in LA and beyond. You know, in that, I've seen so many people from so many different backgrounds just standing in solidarity with us and the communities around us. So I think, like you mentioned earlier, that's going to take us further than what they can ever imagine, right? And again, shout out to all of the journalists out there putting their work on the ground. You, Cerise, Ben Camacho, I know Rob Camacho, A. Marquez, the list goes on, you know? But you guys are doing a fantastic job just trying to make sure that we stay informed and making sure we focus on the things that we're supposed to, you know? Because right now with what we're seeing, it's so easy to be consumed by everything that's going on that, you know, everything else that should matter is being unseen. But Joey, thank you so much for making the time to come out here. For people who want to check out your work or find out more about you, where can people find you?
Yeah, I have my independent reporting on, it's joeyscott.xyz. You can find me on Blue Sky, Joey Never Joe. Also on Twitter, now X, Joey Never Joe, and Instagram, Joey Never Joe as well.
Awesome, dude. Thank you so much again. Everybody else, we're signing off for today. You're listening to KQBHLP, Los Angeles, California, 101.5 FM. You just finished listening to the Social Primate. And we'll see you guys next week.